I was 32 years old when I married Jessica, my girlfriend of 3 years. We had a simple wedding, nothing fancy, just close friends and family at a small venue by the lake. What my new wife and her seemingly nice family did not know was that 6 months before proposing, my grandmother Martha had left me 3 valuable apartments in downtown Seattle. Something in my gut told me to keep this inheritance private, and I am eternally grateful I listened to that instinct. Before I tell you what happened just a week after our wedding, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button to join my journey of learning some hard truths about family, money, and trust. My grandmother Martha was everything to me. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, she took me in and raised me as her own. Our modest 2-bedroom house in the suburbs became my sanctuary, and Martha became my rock. Carson, she would tell me while we sat at the kitchen table going through bills, never tell people how much money you have. Not your friends, not your colleagues, and especially not people you date. At the time, I thought she was just being paranoid. We were comfortable but not wealthy, so who would care about our finances anyway? But Martha had lived through some hard times, and her wisdom came from experience. Money changes people, Carson. It makes some show their true colors, and those colors are not always pretty. She taught me about saving, investing, and the importance of financial independence. By the time I graduated college with my computer science degree, I had no student loans thanks to her careful planning and the small college fund my parents had left behind. 6 months before I proposed to Jessica, Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep at 89. I was devastated. She was my only family, my guiding light, the woman who had shaped me into the man I had become. The grief was overwhelming, but I had no idea how much more complicated things were about to get. A week after the funeral, her lawyer called me into his office. I expected to inherit her house, which we had been living in together for the past few years, as her health declined. What I did not expect was to learn that my practical, frugal grandmother had quietly amassed a small real estate portfolio over decades. Your grandmother leaves to you 3 apartment units in the Belltown neighborhood of Seattle, the lawyer said, sliding a folder across the desk. I stared at him in disbelief. 3 apartments. In Belltown, how he explained that Martha had purchased them in the 70s when prices were reasonable. She had been quietly collecting rent and reinvesting it all these years. The property values had skyrocketed as Seattle boomed. The current market value of all 3 units combined is approximately $2.4 million, he said matter-of-factly. I nearly fell out of my chair. My grandmother, who clipped coupons and bought generic brands, was a millionaire. The lawyer went on to explain that the apartments were fully paid off and currently rented to long-term tenants. She had also left me her house and a modest but healthy investment portfolio. She was very specific in her will that this inheritance was for you alone. The lawyer emphasized, and she recommended that you maintain the same property management company she used. In the months that followed, I struggled with both grief and the sudden responsibility of managing these properties. The property management company made things easier, but I still had to make decisions and sign documents, all while trying to process that my grandmother had left me a small fortune that she had never mentioned. I met Jessica at a friend's birthday party around the time I was starting my first job as a junior software developer. She was vibrant, beautiful, and smart, working as a marketing coordinator for a local company. We hit it off immediately, talking until the party wound down and I finally worked up the courage to ask for her number. Our relationship progressed naturally. We dated for 3 years before I proposed. I loved everything about her, her sense of humor, her ambition, her kindness. When I introduced her to my grandmother during our first year of dating, Martha was polite but reserved. Later, she took me aside. "She seems nice, Carson. Just remember what I taught you about keeping your finances private until you are absolutely certain." At the time, I thought she was being overprotective. I did not tell Jessica about my inheritance after Martha died but not because I was suspicious of her. I planned to surprise her with it later, when we would be ready to buy a home together. I imagined how excited she would be to learn we could afford our dream house without a crushing mortgage. It was during our engagement that I started noticing things about Jessica's family that gave me pause. Her father, Frank, owned a successful car dealership. Her mother, Diane, was heavily involved in local charity work, and her younger brother, Tyler, at 27, still lived at home with no steady job. The first time I had dinner at their large house, in one of Seattle's most exclusive neighborhoods, the conversation revolved almost entirely around money. Frank talked about his newest luxury car. Diane discussed her friend's recent home renovation cost, and they asked very direct questions about my salary and career prospects. Software engineering, Frank had said, swirling his scotch. That is a growth field. Must be good money in that. I gave vague answers, saying only that I was doing well and had good prospects for advancement. Jessica later told me her parents were just trying to make sure she would be taken care of. I understood their concern, but something about their fixation on material wealth made me uncomfortable. When we announced our engagement, Diane immediately started planning an extravagant wedding with a guest list of over 300 people, most of whom would be their business associates and social connections. We want to give our only daughter the wedding she deserves, she said, though Jessica and I had already discussed wanting something small and intimate. It took weeks of gentle but firm pushback to get them to accept our decision for a simpler celebration. Even then, they insisted on paying for certain upgrades to make it presentable. Throughout the wedding planning, I remained silent about my inheritance. Something in me, perhaps my grandmother's voice in my head, warned me to wait, just to be sure. After our honeymoon in Hawaii, Jessica and I moved into a rented apartment. She seemed surprised when I suggested renting rather than buying. I thought we would start looking for a house right away, she said. I told her I wanted to save more for a down payment first to ensure we could afford something really nice in a few years. She accepted this explanation, though not without some disappointment. Little did I know how quickly things would change or how grateful I would be for my grandmother's advice. The first week of marriage was everything I had hoped for. Jessica and I settled into our new routine with ease, decorating our apartment and enjoying our time as newlyweds. But that blissful period was short-lived. On day 8 of our marriage, Diane showed up unannounced at our apartment with a housewarming gift, a luxurious but impractical crystal vase that looked wildly out of place in our modest rental. "I just wanted to see how you two lovebirds are settling in," she said, peering around our apartment with barely disguised disappointment. "It is cozy, I suppose." The following day, she returned with some leftover food from her luncheon. The day after that, she brought decorative pillows that would brighten up the place. Each visit included a subtle comment about our living situation and numerous questions about my work salary and future plans. "Carson, have they discussed giving you a raise yet?" she asked during one visit. "Jessica mentioned you have been at the same position for quite some time now." The questions became increasingly invasive. Did my parents leave me anything? Did I have investments? What was my credit score? Each time I deflected as politely as I could, growing more uncomfortable with each visit. One evening, I came home early and overheard Jessica on the phone in our bedroom. I did not mean to eavesdrop, but when I heard my name, I paused in the hallway. "Mom, I already told you, Carson says he wants to save more before we buy a house," Jessica was saying, sounding exasperated. "No, I do not know exactly how much he has saved. Yes, I know Dad thinks it is strange. Look, I will try to get more information." Okay, I quietly stepped back and made noise coming through the front door again, calling out to announce my arrival. Jessica ended her call quickly and greeted me with a smile that now seemed slightly strained. That weekend, Frank invited me to play golf, something he had never done before. As we made our way around the course, the conversation inevitably turned to money. "You know, Carson," he said, as we walked to the next hole, "in my experience, a man should be established by your age. When I was 32, I already owned my dealership and had a vacation property. Everyone has their own timeline, I replied carefully. Sure, sure, he nodded. But Jessica deserves a certain lifestyle. She was raised with certain expectations. The implication was clear. I was not meeting their standards for their daughter. Throughout the game, he dropped hints about friends with job openings that paid real money and suggested I might benefit from his business connections. The following week, we were invited to dinner at their house. Over an elaborate meal, Frank and Diane talked about houses for sale in their neighborhood. The Andersons are selling their place, Diane mentioned casually. It would be perfect for you two. 4 bedrooms for when the grandchildren come along. When I explained that such a house would be well out of our price range at the moment, Frank scoffed. Carson, son, sometimes you have to stretch a bit to get what you want in life. We could help with the down payment. Consider it an investment in your future. Their offer made me deeply uncomfortable. Taking financial help would mean giving them even more influence over our lives, something I already sensed they wanted too much of. On the drive home, Jessica dropped a bombshell. I gave Mom and Dad our financial information, she admitted. They just want to help us plan for our future. You did what I asked, stunned. Jessica, that is private information. They are my parents, Carson. They care about us and want to make sure we are making smart decisions. I tried to explain why I was uncomfortable with her parents' involvement in our finances, but she dismissed my concerns as paranoia. That night I lay awake, wondering if I had made a mistake in keeping my inheritance secret, but something still told me to wait. The next day, I received a call from my property manager, Mr. Williams. I wanted to let you know that someone has been inquiring about your ownership of the Belltown properties, she said. A private investigator claimed to be conducting a routine background check. My blood ran cold. Did you give them any information? Absolutely not. As per your grandmother's instructions, we keep ownership information strictly confidential. I just thought you should know. That night, I came home late from work and found Jessica in my home office, hastily closing a drawer as I entered. What are you doing in here? I asked. Oh, I was just looking for some stamps, she replied, her cheeks flushing. Later, when she was in the shower, I checked the drawer and discovered that several of my financial documents had been disturbed. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. Over the next few days, I noticed other changes in Jessica's behavior. She started talking about quitting her job to focus on starting a family. She made expensive purchases without consulting me, including a designer purse that cost more than our monthly rent. She began dropping hints about my responsibility as her husband to provide the lifestyle she wanted. My friend Amanda's husband just bought her a new car for their 1-month anniversary, she mentioned casually. Is not that romantic? The final straw came when I discovered she had taken photos of some of my financial documents. I found them accidentally while using her tablet to look up a recipe she wanted to make for dinner. There in her photo stream were clear images of my bank statements and investment account information. I closed the tablet and sat in stunned silence, my grandmother's words echoing in my mind. I decided to quietly move my most sensitive financial documents to my office at work and waited to see what would happen next. I did not have to wait long. Exactly 1 week after our wedding, I came home from work to find Jessica, her parents, and a woman I did not recognize sitting in our living room. They had set up an impromptu meeting around our dining table, which was covered with documents. Carson, honey, you are home, Jessica said, her voice unnaturally bright. Mom and Dad stopped by to help us with some financial planning. Diane stood up and embraced me with a stiff hug. We thought it was time to get your marriage started on the right financial footing. Frank remained seated, nodding at me with a smug smile. Son, this is Patricia. She is a notary and a financial advisor who works with our family. Patricia gave me a practiced smile. Lovely to meet you, Carson. I looked at the documents spread across the table, immediately recognizing them as financial forms. Joint account agreements, power of attorney forms, and what appeared to be loan agreements. "What is all this?" I asked, keeping my voice level, despite the anger and betrayal I felt rising inside me. "Just some paperwork to help organize your finances," Diane explained in a patronizing tone. "We believe that in a marriage, all assets should be jointly held. It is the modern way." Frank leaned forward. "Carson, Jessica tells us you are quite private about money. That is admirable in some ways, but in a family, transparency is essential. These documents will help you and Jessica combine your finances properly." I picked up one of the forms which would add Jessica as a joint owner to all my accounts. Another was a family loan agreement that would grant her parents access to funds for investment opportunities. "And what investments would those be?" I asked. "Well, Tyler has this business idea," Frank began, "and we thought, as his brother-in-law, you might want to help him get started." As they continued explaining their plans for my money they did not even know I had, I discreetly took out my phone and texted my lawyer, "Emergency. Come to my apartment now. Bring Martha's will and property documents." I pretended to listen as they outlined how they would help manage my finances. Frank's condescending attitude became clearer with each word. "The thing is, Carson," he said, "Jessica was raised to understand wealth management. No offense, but coming from your background, you might not have had those advantages." I nodded along, buying time until my lawyer could arrive. Then Diane said something that made my blood freeze. "And of course, we will need to discuss those apartments in Belltown. Properties like that require professional management." The room went silent as I stared at her. "What apartments?" Diane exchanged a look with Frank before continuing. "Carson, there is no need to continue this charade. We know about your inheritance. The 3 apartment units in Belltown, your grandmother's house, the investment portfolio. How do you know about that?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Frank cleared his throat. "We have a responsibility to make sure Jessica is marrying someone suitable. We had you thoroughly vetted before the wedding. You had me investigated." I looked at Jessica, whose face had gone pale. "Did you know about this?" "She would not meet my eyes." "It was just a routine background check, Carson. All parents do it." "No, Jessica, they do not." Frank waved his hand dismissively. "The point is, now we know you have been hiding significant assets from our daughter. That is not how a marriage starts. But we are willing to overlook this deception if we can all move forward with proper financial arrangements." "And what arrangements would those be?" I asked. Diane smiled sweetly. "We think it makes sense for Jessica to have one of the apartments titled in her name alone as security. Another could be sold to provide capital for Tyler's business venture. The third you can keep, of course." I stared at them in disbelief. They had investigated me, invaded my privacy, and now were trying to take 2/3 of my inheritance within a week of my marriage to their daughter. And if I refuse, Frank's facade of friendliness disappeared. "Then we would have to question your commitment to this marriage. Jessica deserves a husband who puts her needs first." Jessica finally spoke up. "Carson, it is not like that. They just want to make sure I am taken care of." "Is that why you went through my office? Took pictures of my financial documents? Was that all to make sure you were taken care of?" Tears filled her eyes. "I love you, Carson. I married you because I love you." "But did you know about my inheritance before you agreed to marry me?" I asked directly. Her silence was all the answer I needed. Frank stood up, his patience clearly at an end. "Enough dramatics. Are you going to sign these papers or not?" Just then there was a knock at the door. Relief flooded through me as I went to answer it. My lawyer, Mrs. Bennett, stood there with a portfolio under her arm. "Perfect timing," I said, ushering her in. "Mrs. Bennett, my lawyer. She has some information that might be relevant to this discussion." Frank and Diane exchanged worried glances. "What is this?" Frank demanded. "We do not need another lawyer here, Mrs." Bennett assessed the situation quickly, seeing the notary and the documents on the table. Mr. Williams contacted me with concerns about potential financial coercion. I see those concerns were justified. This is a family matter, Diane insisted. No, I said firmly. This is an attempt to defraud me of my inheritance. As Mrs. Bennet began explaining the legal ramifications of their actions, Jessica pulled me into the bedroom. Carson, please, she begged. They are just trying to help. Maybe they went about it the wrong way, but we can work this out. Did you marry me knowing about my inheritance? I asked again. After a long pause, she whispered, They found out about it when we got engaged. They said I would be stupid to let someone with that kind of money get away. So our entire marriage is based on a lie. No, I do love you, Carson. The money just made it easier to commit. Her words hit me like a physical blow. The woman I thought I knew, the future I had imagined, crumbled before my eyes. In the living room, I could hear Frank threatening legal action, claiming Jessica was entitled to my assets as my wife, Mrs. Bennet calmly informed him that my grandmother's will had specific provisions protecting the inheritance in the event of marriage or divorce. Mr. Thompson, she said, using Frank's surname, I should also inform you that hiring a private investigator under false pretenses and attempting to coerce someone into signing over property can constitute criminal fraud. Frank's face turned red. Are you threatening me? No, I am informing you of the law. Diane stood up, gathering her purse. Jessica, get your things. You are coming home with us. If your husband wants to choose money over family, that is his decision. Jessica looked at me pleadingly. Carson, please. In that moment, I knew our marriage was over before it had really begun. My grandmother had tried to warn me, and I had not listened carefully enough, but at least I had kept my inheritance private long enough to protect it. I think you should go with your parents, I said quietly. Mrs. Bennet will be in touch about divorce proceedings. As they left, Frank turned to me with a venomous look. She will get half of everything. That is the law. Mrs. Bennet smiled coldly. Actually, in the state of Washington, with a marriage of less than 2 weeks and a protected inheritance, that is not the law at all. Good evening, Mr. Thompson. The door closed behind them, and I sank onto the couch, overwhelmed by what had just happened. My 1-week marriage was over, but thanks to my grandmother's wisdom, my financial future remained secure. That night, I stayed at a hotel. I could not bear to be in the apartment surrounded by wedding gifts and photos of what I had thought was a loving relationship. Mrs. Bennet had advised me not to communicate with Jessica or her family directly and to let her handle all interactions going forward. The next day, I arranged to meet Jessica at a coffee shop, a neutral public location, to talk one last time. I needed to understand if anything in our relationship had been real. She arrived looking exhausted, her eyes red from crying. For a moment I felt a pang of sympathy, but then I remembered how she had participated in her family's scheme. I am sorry, she said immediately. It was not supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? I asked. She stared down at her untouched coffee. I really did fall in love with you when we first met. That part was real. But when my parents found out about your inheritance, they started pushing me to secure my future. They kept saying how perfect it was that I had found someone with both a good job and hidden assets. So you went along with it. She nodded miserably. At first, I told them to back off. I said I loved you and would marry you regardless. But they kept working on me, talking about financial security, about how love does not pay bills. And you believed them, I told myself. It did not change anything. I already wanted to marry you. Knowing you had money just meant we would have an easier life together. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I convinced myself it was not wrong because I would have married you anyway. I let her words sink in trying to separate truth from manipulation. Even if that were true, Jessica, you invaded my privacy. You shared my personal information with your parents. You were going to let them pressure me into signing over my property. How could you think any of that was okay? They said it was normal, that all married couples share everything. Not like this. Not through coercion. She wiped her eyes. What happens now? Now we get divorced, I said simply. Mrs. Bennett will contact your lawyer, assuming you get one. Given the circumstances and the length of our marriage, it should be straightforward. And us. There is no us, Jessica. There cannot be after this. She reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled away. Carson, we can start over. I will tell my parents to stay out of our lives. We can move away even. I shook my head. The trust is gone. I will never be able to look at you without wondering what is real and what is part of some plan. As I stood to leave, she asked one final question. Did you ever plan to tell me about the inheritance? Yes, I said honestly. I was going to surprise you when we were ready to buy a house. I imagined how happy you would be to learn we could afford your dream home without financial stress. Her quiet sob followed me as I walked away, closing the chapter on what I had thought would be my happy ending. The divorce process was painful, but as Mrs. Bennett had predicted, relatively straightforward. Given the brief duration of our marriage and the protected status of my inheritance, Jessica received none of my assets. She did not fight it, though her parents apparently wanted her to. During those difficult months, my grandmother's lessons about financial privacy protected me in ways I had never anticipated. Had I been open about my inheritance from the beginning, Jessica and I might have still married, but I would have had no way to discover her family's true intentions until it was too late. I moved into one of my Belltown apartments after the divorce was finalized. It was a beautiful space with large windows overlooking the city, but it felt empty despite the furnishings. I threw myself into work, advancing in my career and continuing to manage the properties my grandmother had left me. 6 months after the divorce, I ran into Amanda, one of Jessica's friends, at a local coffee shop. To my surprise, she asked to speak with me. You should know, she said hesitantly, this was not the first time they did something like this. What do you mean Jessica dated a guy in college whose family owned a chain of restaurants? Her parents did the same thing, pushed her to get more serious, talked about marriage right away. It fell apart when the guy realized what was happening. The information was both validating and deeply sad. Jessica had been raised by parents who viewed relationships as financial transactions, and she had never broken free from their influence. A year after the disastrous end of my marriage, I was in a much better place. Therapy had helped me process the betrayal and rebuild my sense of trust in my own judgment. I had established a small foundation in my grandmother's name, focused on teaching young adults about financial literacy and healthy relationships with money. I remained cautious about dating, but not closed off to the possibility of finding genuine connection. I had learned to look for red flags, but also to recognize that not everyone was like Jessica and her family. My grandmother's wisdom had saved me from a lifetime of manipulation and control. Her lessons about financial privacy had seemed old-fashioned, even paranoid, but they turned out to be incredibly prescient. When I visit her grave, I often tell her how right she was. Money does change people. It reveals character rather than building it. By keeping quiet about my inheritance, I had inadvertently created a test that revealed the true nature of the woman I had married and the family I had almost joined. The experience taught me that while privacy has its place, especially when it comes to finances, building a genuine relationship requires honesty and trust that goes both ways. It is a delicate balance, finding someone who values you for yourself, not your assets, while being open enough to build true intimacy. So what do you think? Have you ever discovered someone's true intentions were different than what they claimed? How do you balance privacy and openness in relationships? Leave a comment below and share your experiences. And if you found value in my story, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more lessons I have learned the hard way. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes what seems like paranoia is actually wisdom in disguise. Until next time, take care of yourselves and your hearts.